Welcome to the Half Empty, Half Full Consumer Advocacy Radio Show. Listen in nationwide on the Tan Talk and Starcom radio networks with your host, Lori Zook, the consumer champion. Each week, we'll be discussing problems and solutions, changing negatives to positives, and helping you, the consumer, to learn something new, get smarter faster, and avoid scams and fraud. All opinions are that of the host and guests, and all shows are for educational purposes only and not to be construed as legal advice. Here's your host, Lori Zook.
And welcome to the show. My guest today is Andy Feinberg. He's manager of the New York City-based CJA Partners hedge fund and Kiplinger's finance columnist. Now, Andy's been a repeat guest. I love him. He's one of my favorites because we always have a lot to talk about. And today we're going to be talking about what drives government financial debts. And is it related to why consumers live beyond their means? So I want to welcome you to the show, Andy. And if you would share with our listeners a bit about yourself and your background.
Okay, well, it's great to be with you. I've been a business writer for, well over 30 years. And 22 years ago, I published a book called Downsize Your Debt, which makes me something of an expert on consumer debt and what consumers can do about it. And since then, I've mostly written about investing. And as you said, I have my own hedge fund. So I divide my life between journalism and investing. So finance problems are always on my mind.
Okay. Well, you know a lot more than I do. You know that I am a credit consultant, and I actually teach my clients how to deal with their consumer credit reporting issues legitimately, which a lot of companies do not do. But I know that you know your stuff, and you know a lot more than I do. So what I want to start with is the history of the U.S. bankruptcy laws. So I did a little bit of research, and then I'm going to ask you your opinion. But my understanding of bankruptcy, and we've done shows on here before about bankruptcies can occur when liabilities exceed assets. So a person that owes more in debt than they can ever hope to pay back might file bankruptcy. It's spending beyond your means to repay. And of course, might be legitimate times like medical expenses, things happen. But then again, you have the people that just go out and use credit cards, like it's not real money. So there are different types of bankruptcies that can either work on a repayment plan or total liquidation, and there's no criminal penalty. So when I looked up the history of our own government initiating bankruptcy laws for citizens and business, this is what I found. Bankruptcy law was originally modeled after England's laws. Congress passed the Bankruptcy Act in 1800, and it had a lot of restrictions, more so than today's law, but it was abused by debtors, and it was repealed a few years later. After the financial panic of 1837, Congress passed the Bankruptcy Act of 1841, and this law allowed debtors to voluntarily file bankruptcy and get a discharge of debt. But that law was repealed in 1843 because creditors thought the law wasn't fair. Everybody thinks everything is unfair. Okay, and that's what it comes down to. In 1867, Congress passed the Bankruptcy Act of 1867. The law was more detailed, but again, it failed. Then the Bankruptcy Act of 1898 was passed by Congress and amended multiple times. Congress passed another Bankruptcy Reform Act in 1978, where bankruptcy judges were given more power and different types of bankruptcy were available. So my question is, if it took 178 years of attempts to make various bankruptcy laws that had all failed until the most recent law, why do you think it took Congress so many tries to come up with a Bankruptcy Act for consumers that actually worked? And that's a loaded question.
Yeah, well, it's very difficult to balance the different needs. It's interesting you said that the first law was based on laws in England, because if you go back to Dickens' time in the mid-19th century, they thought debtors, they often threw them in prison. And they were debtors' prisons. And of course, if you're in prison, there's no way you can earn money to repay your debt. So are you in prison forever? So that was obviously, there have been some terrible approaches. And then there are, it's just today in the paper, President Obama is talking about finding a way to have student debts discharged or partially discharged in bankruptcies. The way it is today, you file bankruptcy, your student debt is the one debt it's unaffected.
Right, it's excluded. Right.
So it's in the news this morning, to change it. And just a sidebar, student debt has been such a big issue, and may even be an election issue in 2016 because of the tough job market, and a lot of students, also some schools that say they, graduates get nursing jobs, but they actually don't. But even regular colleges that aren't lying, people come out with $100,000 in debt, and they get a job that pays $20,000. It's hard to work that.
Well, it's almost hard. Yeah, how do you come up with the amount determined for college? Because I think nowadays, if it were me and I were going back to college, I'd be saying, well, if I get out of college and I owe $200,000 in debt, but in the future, what might I be making in that particular job to balance it out? But I've been hearing also that this student debt crisis is the next biggest subsequent to the foreclosure crisis, and in bankruptcy, like you said, you have student debt is excluded. They will come after you forever, with maybe the rare exception of a medical discharge. So I'm going to agree with you on that.
Well, and it's take the field of law. I mean, and law school applications are dropping like a stone because a lot of people can graduate with a law degree and they can't find a job in the legal field. And by definition, most of them are carrying a lot of debt. Because law school is expensive, and it's a tough time. But to get back to your original question, and I think it's interesting to look at the student debt side because people, how the credit card companies, should they get certain cents on the dollar, and what about the bank and foreclosure, and there are all these different parts, and to get agreement and to get some degree of fairness into the system is tricky, and we can argue.
Yeah.
We could argue for a long time how well they've done it right now.
Do you not think that it's almost foreseen coming down the road that the crisis really isn't over? And let me kind of exclude New York City, because I know that's where you're based. New York City, I don't think felt the foreclosure crisis like the rest of the country, correct? Because from what I understand, the real estate pretty much held its value there.
I wouldn't say it held its, but we didn't have a foreclosure crisis. We did not have. There was nothing like Stockton, California, or Las Vegas, or Florida, or happening to us. It was more stable, and wasn't good, but it was. None of my friends had the horror stories like that to tell.
Right, because I'm down in Florida where the horror story still exists. People are still in foreclosure, and the student debt issues. I mean, I know people that have defaulted on student debts, and there is no way for them to file bankruptcy because they don't even have money to pay back the student debt. And if you can't find a job in a place that's been financially hard hit, you might be forced to file the bankruptcy. But right now, the student debt is not excluded. Or I'm sorry, it is excluded. They do have to pay it back. But what you're saying is maybe that should change, or maybe that will change.
Well, that's what the president said yesterday, and people in politics say
a lot of things,
and whether they actually become reality or not, it varies. And I think, but the one thing I'll say is I think you could definitely make a case that student debt is greater problem today than it was at any other time in my lifetime, as far as the size of the debt compared to the income that a job that they might actually get would produce.
Maybe that's why a lot of them are now rethinking college and the expense and learning something on their own and becoming entrepreneurs, because you hear all about the stories about all these famous, millionaires and billionaires that dropped out of high school or college and went on their own. They don't have the student debt, and, they made lots of money.
Right.
So
and Bill Gates, right, by dropping out after 1 year, avoided tons of student debt, and that's the key to his success.
Wow. Yeah, it's so crazy, because now I'm not a parent, but if I was, I'd be thinking, wow, I don't know that I could afford to put a child through school, and a lot of parents, what they do is they co-sign on the student loans, and now it's also on their credit, so they're also liable for that debt, correct?
Right, they are, and it's that's going to cause some interesting problems, and I don't know if they revise the law how they will deal with that issue. The student versus and the parent, and although I don't know that you can separate them, I think one of the things about this recovery, and it's said a lot, but it's a lot of the jobs are just not particularly high-paying jobs. So that Starbucks pays its baristas, decently considering the market, and they have wonderful health benefits. But if a barista is carrying college loans, that's going to be a tough one, or they have to live with 3 or 4 other people, and it's not a bad job, but it's not a good job for paying back tons of debt.
Right. Well, stay with us. I want to take a quick break, and we'll be back in just a moment.
I don't have any reason, left them all behind. I'm in a New York state of mind.
Our highly competitive and hectic world is fraught with dishonesty and challenges. Critical decisions must be made on a daily basis with accuracy when substantial assets are at risk. When you are confronted with a decision point involving opportunity and risk, consult with Sharpline Investigations, statewide experts in due diligence, investigations, and litigation support. Sharpline's professionals work with clients to conduct interviews, deep background investigations, and develop facts and intelligence related to litigation. When circumstances require confidential and expert fact-finding, turn to Sharpline Investigations, the statewide leaders in investigations and risk mitigation. Visit sharplineinvestigations.com or call 855-394-0042.
Are your credit reports a mess? Are debt collectors hounding you? Maybe you're in foreclosure or headed towards foreclosure and don't know where to turn. It's time to stop panicking. Take back control of your life. Make the first step by calling Credit Education Consultants today at 813-500-6064. That's 813-500-6064. Mention the word radio for a free 15-minute consultation. Don't delay. Call today.
Do you suffer from back, neck, or body pain? Do you suffer from migraines or have jaw or face pain? Has conventional medicine failed you? Were you injured or in an accident? Call chiropractic physician Dr. Dan Maddock at 813-935-1664. Dr. Dan has helped thousands of patients gain relief for more than 30 years. Dr. Dan is caring, gentle, and takes his time with each patient. He's also a past president of the International Craniopathic Society, a special certification of only 300 chiropractors worldwide. Dr. Dan helps patients from the neck up and the neck down. Dr. Dan accepts most insurance plans. Don't continue to live in pain. Call 813-935-1664 today. That's 813-935-1664 and get on track to better health.
Welcome back to the Half Empty, Half Full Talk radio show. I've been speaking with Andy Feinberg. He is my guest today. He's manager of the New York City-based CJA Partners hedge fund and Kiplinger's finance columnist. Now, here comes the fun question, Andy. Most people, even me, I've always thought that the United States declared bankruptcy in 1933. Did that actually happen? And is the United States actually a business or corporation? And can governments or states declare bankruptcy?
Well, the first part, the U.S. did not declare bankruptcy, but the Emergency Banking Act, which went into effect right after FDR took office, there was an enormous banking crisis that started in February of 1933 when Hoover was still president, but FDR had been elected to succeed him. So Michigan was hit, terribly by the Depression, and this started to spread to other states. So part of the act was to declare a banking holiday, which meant you couldn't get your money, you couldn't send a wire, you couldn't use a bank to pay debts, and I believe the U.S. for those days wasn't paying its debts. And I think that's part of what people have in their mind, that the financial system did seize up in ways not so dissimilar to what happened, at the end of George Bush's presidency and the beginning of Barack Obama's presidency. It's interesting it happens in both cases at the transition period. So we weren't bankrupt in the sense when a country defaults, and we'll discuss that in a second, they don't pay all the money they owe. We paid all the money we owed, and we didn't work out a new plan with Great Britain and say, we can't pay you in 10 years, we'll pay you in 20 years, which is like the good case scenario of when countries default. They just make the payments longer and in inflated dollars, so it hurts less.
Okay.
But we did have sort of a non-functioning financial system for 4 days, and but it ended up restoring confidence because it stopped the runs on the bank, and then we had Roosevelt decided to shore up the banks before we actually had FDIC insurance, which came shortly after. So there was a promise by the government that you didn't have to run and take your money out of the bank because we would make it good. And again, just as when Hank Paulson was Treasury Secretary and he said, we will back the banks, and it helped the market greatly because Citi and Bank of America, and it could have been every bank in the country, were going under. So a country doesn't declare bankruptcy per se, but they do from time to time default. And I found it was interesting, in the last 200 years, the two countries, I believe, that have defaulted the most are Greece and Argentina. Together, 15 times they've defaulted. And Greece, most recently in 2012, I believe. And, of course, now they're in the headlines because they're negotiating with the Troika about their debt repayment plan, and whether there will be another default or not, or the payments will be stretched out. We'll see. And sometimes when countries default, just like people, they can face very punitive lending terms, or in many cases can't get credit from some sources as they try to get back on their feet. But it's almost never a ploy by a country. It's like there's nothing else they can do, because now with Greece you can argue if they were better at taxing their citizens and getting their citizens to actually pay the taxes they were supposed to. It's such a corrupt tax system that then they would be able to repay. But that's not going to change overnight.
Okay.
So that's my long answer.
Yeah, no, I find the whole thing interesting, because something you made me think about was this. With the foreclosure crisis, of the past years, and it's still around, if there's a lot of criminal activity with the lenders or the robo-signing, the judges voting or ruling on the side of the banks. Here's what I look at on the other side. Let's say that the judges ruled in favor of the homeowner. That could have brought the banks crashing down if they didn't have to, have the homeowners repaying them. Do you see where I'm going with that? And then
yes, I do.
They would have crashed again, yet our government bailed out the banks, but the money was actually meant to be used to help the people that were either in foreclosure or had been foreclosed upon. And I believe the average amount was somewhere around $300 or $400. which was nothing. So I had a guest previously on this show who was an attorney and actually had told me that if 20% of that multi-billion-dollar amount had gone to the homeowners in distress and paid it off, it would have only been about 20% of that bailout. But the banks ultimately kept all of that money. So it just seemed to circle around. But do you understand what I'm trying to get to? It could have collapsed.
One of the most controversial, payments is AIG owed Goldman Sachs about $12 billion. I may be off by $1 billion.
Okay.
And AIG got taken away. AIG went bust. And the government made Goldman whole. They gave them every penny that AIG owed them. Once Goldman was not on the ropes, and it's a very controversial thing because it's one thing to bail out a bank that is about to go under, but Goldman wasn't going under, and some of those billions could have gone to individuals,
right?
The people you're talking about, and the fact that they went to Goldman Sachs Partners is one of the outcomes of the crisis that I'm not thrilled about. I mean, there were all these things about bonuses going to AIG people, but some of that was to keep them there so they could see that the company didn't completely unravel. But the payment to Goldman is sort of indicative of how I think they were thinking of the institutions first and citizens second. Of course, if the institutions all went under, it would be horrible for all of us.
Right. Well, I know in the past, there have been companies that the government has bailed out. I think in part because if you don't bail out the company, if the government doesn't bail them out and they go under, now you can have thousands, hundreds of thousands, or millions of jobs at risk, and now there's more unemployment. And it puts us back on that hamster wheel of just going around in circles, and it's the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over.
Right. Well, the auto company bailouts were the clearest examples where the stated government intent was to save jobs, and we can discuss how wise that was or wasn't, but at least it did save jobs. But the question is, and I was going to get to this, later on when we talk about if we get to tax breaks for companies and balancing the budget. We have some tax breaks that do create jobs and seem to be good, but most of them that I have looked at or read about are just things won by lobbyists that benefit the company without benefiting, the citizenry. And but I'm sorry I got to that.
No, that's right. This is
that later on.
It's a huge subject. I have a lot of notes. Obviously, we can always do more than one show, but I want to talk about our legal tender because I often hear that it's no longer backed by gold. I've heard that for years, and that money as a whole is absolutely worthless. Is that truth or fiction?
Well, it's not backed by gold. That is correct. I mean, we went off the gold standard, and that makes some people freaked out. But there isn't enough gold for us to, I don't believe, to be on the gold standard. And but the money it's not.
Do you see what I'm trying to drive?
The paper is worthless. I mean, but it is backed by the full faith and credit of the United States, and that's why when we get to the issue of not raising the debt ceiling, and it becomes such a huge thing because we've never had a default in the United States. We've never, everyone's always gotten paid, basically on time. So if you believe, and I believe that, right now the money is absolutely worth, the $10 that it says on a $10 bill because the government is good for it.
All right. Well,
that always be the case? Is an interesting discussion.
Yeah, because I sit here and go, how does the country dig itself into debt? How is the $10 worth $10? And does the Federal Reserve just keep printing out the money? And I don't know how many billions were in debt. I think I read somewhere 17 billion. Okay.
Well, no, it's gone up. It's now 18 trillion.
Okay.
149 billion. debt.
That could never be paid. How could that ever be paid? If that were a person, that would be like you would be filing bankruptcy because you couldn't pay it back. So you see where I'm going.
I don't think it's our plan to ever pay that back. But then the question becomes, how much debt can we carry? Luckily we have very low interest rates right now. In a rising, when rates go up, the government's going to pay higher interest, and that's going to be a bigger part of the budget, and it's going to be a bigger part of the tax bill that people pay. I mean, we all pay part of our taxes, goes to paying interest on the debt. And the good news is the deficit, the annual amount by which we're, has been declining dramatically since the first year of the Obama presidency, and it's faster than people expected. And I was just reading about healthcare. I mean, healthcare spending has also gone down much more. The rate of increase has been much lower than anticipated, and what they're projecting out now to 2020 is that it will continue to go down. So I just want to give some good news about.
Yeah, we need some good news.
But
yes.
We're still, even with all this good news, the deficit, the total amount we owe grew by over $400 billion in the last year. So
there was a little bit of good news, is what you're saying.
Right. The good news, it was only $400 billion, but it's $400 billion added to what we already owed.
Yeah, and I'm going to ask you to stay with us. We're going to come back and we're going to finish this conversation in the next segment. Stay with us.
Taking off to the city on down.
Are your credit reports a mess? Are debt collectors hounding you? Maybe you're in foreclosure or headed towards foreclosure and don't know where to turn. It's time to stop panicking. Take back control of your life. Make the first step by calling Credit Education Consultants today at 813-500-6064. That's 813-500-6064. Mention the word radio for a free 15-minute consultation. Don't delay. Call today.
Do you suffer from back, neck, or body pain? Do you suffer from migraines or have jaw or face pain? Has conventional medicine failed you? Were you injured or in an accident? Call chiropractic physician Dr. Dan Maddock at 813-935-1664. Dr. Dan has helped thousands of patients gain relief for more than 30 years. Dr. Dan is caring, gentle, and takes his time with each patient. He's also a past president of the International Craniopathic Society, a special certification of only 300 chiropractors worldwide. Dr. Dan helps patients from the neck up and the neck down. Dr. Dan accepts most insurance plans. Don't continue to live in pain. Call 813-935-1664 today. That's 813-935-1664 and get on track to better health.
Our highly competitive and hectic world is fraught with dishonesty and challenges. Critical decisions must be made on a daily basis with accuracy when substantial assets are at risk. When you are confronted with a decision point involving opportunity and risk, consult with Sharpline Investigations, statewide experts in due diligence, investigations, and litigation support. Sharpline's professionals work with clients to conduct interviews, deep background investigations, and develop facts and intelligence related to litigation. When circumstances require confidential and expert fact-finding, turn to Sharpline Investigations, the statewide leaders in investigations and risk mitigation. Visit sharplineinvestigations.com or call 855-394-0042.
Welcome back to the Half Empty, Half Full Talk radio show. My guest is Andy Feinberg, and we've been speaking about what drives government financial debts and is it related to why consumers live beyond their means. And we're going to get to that part shortly. Andy, I want to talk about our leadership. Do you think that we'll ever have leaders that will rein in the outrageous spending?
I thought about this a lot since you. I think someday we will, because we'll have to, but it certainly doesn't look like it at the moment, partly because two things. One, everything seems to get politicized these days. Someone will say something that's reasonable, and then it will be attacked for some political reason, and then it gets withdrawn. On the other hand, you'll have something like the discussion, which is in the air, of reforming the corporate tax system in the U.S. And there is the suggestion by some people that you should have no corporate tax or much lower corporate tax, and that would stimulate economic activity. And one, I don't believe that necessarily. The other thing, though, there are so many breaks, as I was referring to earlier, that corporations get that are not helpful to the United States, not helpful to this whole debt picture we're talking about. And the number of lobbyists today is so much greater than it was 50 years ago, and their power is so enormous. And what they want what's best for their clients, and
right.
Large companies, pharmaceutical companies, General Electric, whomever. And I think some of the stuff is great when you have Nissan building a new auto plant in Tennessee, and where you can show me what the tax credits produced, and these are jobs that endure. I mean, thousands of people are employed in the plant year after year after year, and then if that's successful, then they may come build another one. And but so much of it is just because they're powerful, and so if you genuinely reform the system, I think that would be great. But there's will be so much opposition to it, and that not all of it doesn't break down along party lines necessarily. I mean, there are, our New York's Democratic Senator Chuck Schumer is in bed with the banks, and, he will fight you if you try to take something away that the banks have. And so I'd love to see, I'd love to see corporate tax reform that started with, back when Jimmy Carter started with a great idea called zero-based budgeting, which meant that the program that got $2 billion last year had to justify why it should get any money, or why it should get $2 billion plus inflation this year, and that we're not going to give you $2 billion just because you got it last year.
Right.
This great idea caused such an uproar in Congress, and one of the problems Jimmy Carter had is that his own party in Congress deserted him.
Because they wanted everything to go, that let me tell you, that's the reason that I wanted to do the show today, and lead in with the history of the U.S. and the inability of its leaders to do what's good for the people, and not for not for them, not for the politicians, because they get the special perks and the loopholes, those wealthy people and those corporations. We did a show, if I remember, on the corporations that didn't have to pay any federal income tax.
That's right.
And people are angry. I know I'm angry. I know everybody else is angry, and everybody complains. And sure, you can try and vote out people out of office, but really, I don't know that you see any improvement. I mean, are you angry? Are most people angry? Do they have the right to be angry?
Yes, they absolutely have the right to be angry, and it's so. One thing people might consider is banning lobbying. That does shut out some good groups that would say we only get a voice because we do have a lobbyist. We're otherwise too small to get much. But I think. And net, the power that lobbyists exercise is terrible for the country. It is truly an outrage, and they don't even claim. They would not say that their mission is to do what's best for America. Their mission is to do what's best for their clients, and it would be interesting to see, that the absence of lobbyists would not turn every politician into, Solomon with great wisdom.
Right.
but it would be better. They would have more chance to actually work on behalf of their constituents on things like tax breaks and the debt. I mean, to me, a tax break is so directly connected to this debt that we're talking about.
Right.
You say you don't have to pay the $500 million. Well, we would have gotten that. That would have gone to the Treasury, or sometimes to the Treasury and the state or a municipality. And it's, like Jimmy Carter, I would love to have all those things, justified. You have that. If you used it to build a plant in Tennessee, great. You're getting the same break every year. You already built the plant, but you're still getting $80 million a year just because you built the plant 20 years ago.
Right. But think about it. We have companies that will threaten the states, that will say, hey, you know what? We don't have to pay these taxes. We'll just go overseas. So it's almost like they're holding the states hostage by saying we're going to leave. On the other hand, we give them tax breaks, but it almost seems like we've screwed ourselves over.
Right. And we have,
to a no-win.
And even then we have a bidding war sometimes between states where someone gets a ridiculous break. But at least in that case, we're still talking about if you paid the money or the ransom, the way you set it up, at least we get some jobs for that. And with so many of these breaks, we're not getting the jobs. And one thing you could immediately get the two parties to agree on is that we want job creation. We want, some bang for our buck. And so I think there are things people can coalesce on. And that I think if you had, we just had, Simpson Bowl. We've had impartial committees in Simpson Bowles, and then nothing happens. But if you had one about corporate taxes, I think you might have some very interesting things happen, because you could highlight a number of things that are so egregious and then look to things like them and just say this is not in the interest of the 320 million people of the United States. This is something one lobbyist managed to get through Congress. And that's the thing, when you convince a member of Congress and they attach it to a bill, they get people to vote for their bill, and then they promise to vote for and so they each get to do their various, underhanded things to support their special interest groups. The worst special interest group to me are the corporations of the United States.
But how do you change that? I don't know the history of lobbying, but but I know what they do. How do you get rid of the lobbyists? How do you just shelve the way it is now? Because I think Americans are angry. Everybody complains because it almost seems to me, if you're in government, you're basically going into, not everybody, of course, but you're going into something that's already corrupted. It's like the mafia is of the United States government, and they have all these extra special rules, and they exclude themselves from all of the rules that they make for everybody else. And that's what I find disturbing, because that's helping drive the government debt.
Yes. I don't know. This is the kind of thing that would have to come from citizens, I think, as opposed to, a politician. They're, outlawing lobbying or restricting it in some way that gave us more of a chance to address our problems directly. I think if you got a block of citizens, tens of millions, to just say we don't want it that way, and we're going to vote only for people who don't deal with lobbyists and don't take campaign money from X, Y, and Z. It would take a while, but something could happen. Perhaps. And one of the problems, and you sort of alluded to it being corrupt already, is that when people leave Congress, they often become lobbyists.
Well, sure, they don't want to leave all the money behind. They still want their interests, right?
Billy Townsend becomes head of the pharmaceutical lobby, and it's pays a lot better than Congress did, and then he's hitting up all his buddies in Congress, and it's
disturbing.
Yeah, and the system is broken to an extent. Not that nothing good can happen. And I think even on corporate taxes, if you had a commission and said, okay, some of these are just, we made mistakes, and let's undo these mistakes that were made. We gave them, or we're giving them this amount of money every year, and it generates one job. And that's the guy who gets the check from
right.
the government or something. Let's not do that. And I think if these things were really brought out in the light that you could do that, you'd have to do it fairly. I mean, in the sense that if General Electric were hit, but Bristol-Myers wasn't hit for something similar, then you'd have screaming there, and to do it fairly would take quite a bit of time and energy, and of course political will.
It's hard. Yeah, it's hard to undo what was there. And I'm going to ask you to hold your thought for just a moment. We got to take a quick commercial break, but we'll be right back.
Our highly competitive and hectic world is fraught with dishonesty and challenges. Critical decisions must be made on a daily basis with accuracy when substantial assets are at risk. When you are confronted with a decision point involving opportunity and risk, consult with Sharpline Investigations, statewide experts in due diligence, investigations, and litigation support. Sharpline's professionals work with clients to conduct interviews, deep background investigations, and develop facts and intelligence related to litigation. When circumstances require confidential and expert fact-finding, turn to Sharpline Investigations, the statewide leaders in investigations and risk mitigation. Visit sharplineinvestigations.com or call 855-394-0042.
Do you suffer from back, neck, or body pain? Do you suffer from migraines or have jaw or face pain? Has conventional medicine failed you? Were you injured or in an accident? Call chiropractic physician Dr. Dan Maddock at 813-935-1664. Dr. Dan has helped thousands of patients gain relief for more than 30 years. Dr. Dan is caring, gentle, and takes his time with each patient. He's also a past president of the International Craniopathic Society, a special certification of only 300 chiropractors worldwide. Dr. Dan helps patients from the neck up and the neck down. Dr. Dan accepts most insurance plans. Don't continue to live in pain. Call 813-935-1664 today. That's 813-935-1664 and get on track to better health.
Are your credit reports a mess? Are debt collectors hounding you? Maybe you're in foreclosure or headed towards foreclosure and don't know where to turn. It's time to stop panicking. Take back control of your life. Make the first step by calling Credit Education Consultants today at 813-500-6064. That's 813-500-6064. Mention the word radio for a free 15-minute consultation. Don't delay. Call today.
Welcome back to the Half Empty, Half Full Talk radio show. I've been speaking with Andy Feinberg. And Andy, what I've been leading to in this entire discussion is that seeing our government in financial stress, duress, lack of funds, does it translate to what Americans consider as normal, and do they follow the lead? Is the government setting a poor example where the citizens are saying, hey, if the government, it's acceptable for them to behave this way, guess what? I deserve whatever I can get out of it too. And so what if I file bankruptcy?
I think there's some truth in that. I think first you see politicians not acting like adults. Second, you see them not addressing some serious problems and, putting things off. There are some terrible spending habits And we were sort of addressing those. And, well, we're not changing that, or we can't touch that. It's politically not something we want to do or can do. And I think some people see that and, shrug and go, they're not, they're running the country and they're not serious about their jobs. So,
why should we be?
I will go on a spending binge, or if I don't, bankruptcy's not so bad. I know people who did it, and the other thing, 50% of Americans, from what I've read, you may have a different number, don't have a budget, and it's hard to get your spending right when you don't have even something resembling a budget. And I know one of your favorite tools, and I think one of the best tools, is to have money automatically, for those who can do it, automatically taken from your paycheck and put in a retirement account where it's invested in something you just can't touch. So you don't even see the money. You can't spend some of the money. It's just somewhere else working for your future. And that is, a great thing to do. And I think that, for someone who is in heading toward financial distress, but not yet there, at exactly the point where they need to change their spending habits, I think at the margin they're less likely to make that change because of what they see coming from Washington. And just, I can't even watch political talk shows anymore because it's a screaming match. You learn nothing, and you get depressed because it looks like, these people, they're never going to agree on anything.
There's no hope.
There's no hope. Yeah, and thinking that there's no hope, well, I might as well, have a cocktail and go shopping online or something.
Right, and that's where they spend, online. That's where people spend a lot of money. But one of the things I don't think, first off, there are legitimate reasons for bankruptcy, like I talked about earlier, something medically happened, you got divorced, they're legitimate. But then there are the repeat offenders that file bankruptcy every few years, and they know they're going to get out of it. I'm sure a lot of these people hide money, although it's illegal. I'm sure lots of people have figured out ways to do that. But what these people who are repeat offenders do, what they're not realizing is that when their debts are liquidated in court, and if they file a Chapter 7, they don't have to pay anything typically. The creditors to whom they owe that money, if you add that up with all the people that file bankruptcy in the United States, that's billions of dollars every year that all these companies have now lost. They then have to, in turn, increase their prices for their product or service to make up for that loss, which costs everybody more money.
Absolutely. The sky-high interest rates on most credit cards are to guarantee that they still make a profit even after all the billions that they will lose each year to people who defraud or to people who file bankruptcy, as you just said. And, now the last few years is, now they're adding new fees on,
right.
On top of it, it's not just the interest rate, it's fees on everything. And, or requiring, I got one from Citibank, and it requires some, absurdly large balance to avoid fees on my savings account. And the only way I can avoid it because it's looped in with my wife's. Otherwise, I would have just left the bank because it's just, I'm not going to keep
paying those fees.
$1,000 just earning no interest, and then they want to charge me fees. And
right. Well, you remember we spoke previously when I in a previous show when I talked about why don't people take their money out of the big banks that foreclosed on people often illegally, and you're in the city. So I remember your answer was, well, it's convenient because it's right down the road, but people could actually hurt the banks if they didn't bank with those banks that did that. But I guess my last question to you is, should government be on a budget?
Government, it should be on more of a budget. I absolutely do not favor a balanced budget amendment. And the simplest reason is that in a growing economy, you need the money supply grow. And so we should be running at a deficit, not a large deficit. I mean, the one we have projected for the next year is actually okay. The problem is this train coming down the tracks of the baby boomers retiring, and what that's going to do to. So I think there is a very legitimate discussion about, and the other thing, just when we're talking about government, Social Security was designed, as everyone knows, for a different demographic situation, and it was fine for a long time, and now it's we're living a long time in retirement,
right?
And I hope we live a longer time in retirement. We still don't live. Our life expectancy is 4 years shorter than what it is in Italy, and so preparing for this, reading all this stuff on the United States and our wonderful power, but there's some things where infant mortality we're not good on. We're not living as long as some other countries. So there should be, I think, an amount by which we can overspend in normal times. And for example, when there is a recession, I am a Keynesian. I believe that you increase government spending as Obama did. You try to stimulate an economy that's very weak. There's a big debate about this, but so there are times to run a bigger deficit, I would say, for strategic reasons. But I think there should be, some rules, in like normal times, like I'd say right now looks like a normal time.
Okay.
It may not feel normal for a lot of Americans who are, probably doesn't feel normal for a huge percentage of the middle class because their wages haven't moved in like 30 years, and they're
the middle class are sliding down.
Right. So I just worry that in imposing limits, they will be so political that whoever is in power will, that someone will get hurt more than they should get hurt. But I'm back to, the Jimmy Carter. I think it would be great if with a Congressional Budget Office or someone just looked at a variety of government programs that are very expensive and said, how can, are we really getting bang for the buck? And this may be controversial with some of your listeners, Obamacare is actually doing some very good things as far as hospitals not charging as much. There aren't, in many cases, they're not running as many tests because they're not getting paid for that. They're getting paid a lump sum. They're being penalized if a patient has to re-enter the hospital.
Right.
And
we got about 10 seconds. I'm sorry.
Okay. So there are programs that could actually make things work more effectively. Whatever you think of Obamacare, we can do a better job, and we can get more out of each dollar the government spends.
Well, I want to thank you so much for joining me today because we always have a great discussion. Do you have an email address if someone wants to contact you?
Yes, it's A Feinberg, Feinberg at cjapartners.com.
Great. Thanks again, Andy, for joining me, and join us every week for a new Half Empty, Half Full Consumer Advocacy Talk radio show. Learn something new every week and get smarter faster. Be safe.
I wish it was to take this wine and drink with me. Let's delay our misery. Say